Welcome to the presentation today. My name is Douglas Gabriel, and I'm here with John Barnwell, my dear friend and scholar. Today, we're going to attempt the impossible. I doubt that we will be able to accomplish it. We're going to address the controversial topics, two of them, Saint Germain and Master Jesus. And when you say those names, you usually think of some of the modern interpretations of those, but we're going to share with you from Rudolf Steiner's work the spiritual science insight into these two Western masters. So welcome to the show today, John.
Well, hello there, Douglas, and cordial greetings to you and the industrious, remarkable Tyler Gabriel, Dr. Tyler Gabriel, who's responsible for getting us off the couch to share whatever little things we can pull up out of the cavern of time, But when you get to things like talking about the masters, it's honestly a little bit intimidating because you start to feel a presence when you approach it in the proper mood of soul, and that's a little bit intimidating at times because you want to do justice to such a venerable topic.
So true. And in the 35 books or so that we've been working on, we've tried to take kind of a step-by-step, a holy grail, a gradalis, a gradual slope up the mountain to the summit, and now we're at the summit. So we're going to today talk about two of the greatest secrets in Rosicrucianism and esoteric Christianity and Steiner's Christian cosmology. And later, we have another book coming out on Scythianus and Manu, who will be mentioned today because when you're talking about the stream of avatars, the stream of bodhisattvas, the stream of great leaders, the stream of leaders who have been, as priest kings, overlighted by angels and archangels and archive beings, you are into realms that most people cannot go. And so all I can say is this presentation on my part will have to be inadequate. But if you really want to understand this, and this is why I can get away with it today, John, there's two things that happen that causes this to be possible, actually three things. One of them is that Tyler's Gospel of Sophia, Volume 1, describes the two Johns and why the two Johns are the mystery that are also behind Sophia, and why there's two Marys, and why there's two Jesus children. And these mysteries cannot be just philosophically or intellectually understood. You have to have an experience. So when Tyler wrote these three books, she said, we have to do a direct experience. The time is gone for either the male or the masculine or the feminine. It's got to be something that is a direct experience for people, not just talking, not just dogma and doctrine and all this stuff, which basically I've set my whole life to studying comparative religions. And what we find is that Rudolf Steiner does exactly what he says Saint Germain does. Now, when I say Saint Germain, I'm not going to list all the incarnations of Saint Germain, because if we did, you'd have to go to the only place I know you can find that, and that is in this book and in John's writings, because John wrote the most complete reincarnational timeline of this being that we call Christian Rosenkreutz. But it's so complicated that if you don't have a foundation based upon morality, you can't possibly understand it, because you're looking at Steiner's mission. Steiner's mission was he and another person, his teacher Scherer, not Edward Scherer, but what's Scherer's first name? Julius Scherer? I can't remember his first name.
So you're going to spring something on me that isn't in the book. It's an interesting aside though, because
yes.
His father, I was at a friend of mine's, a rare book dealer years ago, Larry Rubin, and he pulls up this picture, and it was by his father. Yeah, Christian-Oser was the name that
yes.
he was an artist. And so you have this whole destiny unfolding before Rudolf Steiner, with these karmic relationships, endowing him with questions. And I think that a good direction for us to take this is to follow the questions, and then we can get to hopefully someday living into the answer.
Yes, this professor. Now, correct me. The reason I ask you the question is because you'll correct my pronunciation of this, because I'm from the Ozarks.
I'll just say it, sure.
Sure. Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
that's a hard one to say for someone from Missouri. Okay. And so that was his professor who kind of, Rudolf Steiner insinuated that, not insinuated, and this is going to get into the deep stuff of what we're talking about. You're just going to jump in the deep end. It was said that that professor was Socrates reincarnated, and that his mission was to come and teach karma to the Western world. And Rudolf Steiner's mission was to teach reincarnation to the Western world. But when his teacher only brought forth some old folk tales and some old, what were called Christian mystery plays, the Oberrufer plays, which we do in the Waldorf schools, that was really his cultural gift to the world, but he did not teach karma, even though others, as Steiner pointed out, at that time did. So other people picked up that task. So just because you were Socrates in one incarnation doesn't mean you're going to be Socrates in the next incarnation. So there's few of these beings who are the kind of consistent from incarnation to incarnation. So when you get an Annie Besant, or you get the whole Theosophical Society, or Elizabeth Clare Prophet talking about all the incarnations of all these people we're going to talk about, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't mesh together. So they just start mishmashing and supergluing things together. And pretty soon you got Annie Besant saying that she's, every major female incarnation that there ever was. Silly stuff like that. No, it isn't that. I studied comparative religions both in the Catholic Church and out of it. And basically every single incongruency in the life of Christ, or in the study of Christ, or in really there are few Christian cosmologies besides spiritual science. But these incongruencies, for instance, in the Matthew and the Luke gospel, you have two different genealogies. Well, how can that be? And then the excuses of scholars will make you laugh if you actually study this stuff. And then you say, but wait, there's two different births described here. One the three magi came to, and the other one is in a humble manger with angels and shepherds coming. What's all that about? And then someone, tries to pound on your head and say the Bible's literal. Well, it can't be literal. I remember that my teacher, Father William, had cataloged all of the incongruencies in the Bible, and it was in the thousands. You just go, it can't possibly be literal, right? No, it's not literal. It is mystery initiation teaching. And in it, if you understand it like Steiner did, you not only know that the four gospels are what they are, where they came from, and what they were trying to accomplish, and why they don't agree, but he wrote the fifth gospel, which was the missing pieces to the pie. And this pie has been cut up so many ways that I studied that I could find, all the different views of Jesus was a man. No, Jesus was a God and a man. No, Jesus was a God who became a man. No, Jesus was and then Christ came in here, and all these different views. Christ never died on the cross. Christ was, and then they confused Apollonius of Tyana with Christ, and he went to India. No, I've seen the body of Jesus of Nazareth in India. This is believed by people. So what are you going to do? Are you going to believe the psychics and the channelers who tell you that they can channel Saint Germain? You know how many of those are? There's dozens of cults of Saint Germain. Are any of those valid? They all have pieces of the pie, because Saint Germain inspires through his being of Christian Rosenkreutz. And I don't know if we'll get deep enough to describe how CRC, as he's called in Rosicrucianism, or the rose on the cross, had, for instance, 10 martyr incarnations. No one knows who those incarnations are, but many other incarnations. And when you line them up and you go, oh my gosh, this is one of the oldest beings right after the Garden of Eden. And so today, if we were to truly explain this, we'd have to do what is done in the Gospel of Sophia, explain the fact that all human beings have an archetype that was left in heaven. Now, some would say that that's the mother lodge of the sun. Some would say it's Shambhala. Some would, say it's the plasma fields. It doesn't really matter what you call it. Some would call it the Akashic record. But the fact of the matter is that each of us is aiming towards a perfected nature of ourselves. So I'm Douglas. So there is an original Douglas. In Hebrew, it's called Kadman. Well, the same is true with Adam and Eve. There was an original Adam, an original Eve. They were the template that all humans were taken from, that came into the world and had to suffer duality. So when you're looking, and that's true with even cosmology, it's about electrons and protons. Are they connecting? If they do, they create molecules. If they don't, you have 99.99% of space, which is unseparated male and femaleness, which is plasma. And that was one of the secrets of the Rosicrucians, again, that was given through the perfected body of Christian Rosenkreutz. Now, Christian Rosenkreutz, CRC, had the help of the 12 great beings. I'm not going to get into the detail, but I will tell you that in this book that we have, Saint Germain and Master Jesus, it's described in 5 different directions by Steiner in what happened to get this being. I just have to say it, John. There's no way around it. The being Cain. You think Cain and Abel, their story ended back in the Old Testament? No, they reincarnated again and again and again. And when you hear this whole story, in terms of human beings, the only other story that is equivalent to it in all of human spiritual history and evolution is Eve, the original Eve. So they're called by Steiner Adam Kadmon. He never calls her Eve Kadmon, but says that she's this pure being, described through the Nathan line in the Gospel of St. Luke. And they lived in the Essene community. They're these pure beings. There's no way to describe Saint Germain and his incarnations or the Master Jesus unless you understand these principles. And these principles are essentially the distillation of all the wisdom of the ancients through all of the different systems that I have studied, and John has probably studied equally as many or more. These systems all insinuate this, from the art of the Renaissance and later periods, showing that there were 2 Jesus children, there were 2 Marys. And when you know this, and you know who they are in cosmic history, you have what Tyler Gabriel has accomplished, Dr. Gabriel has accomplished in her book, The Gospel of Sophia. It's a trilogy, to describe to you and get you to the point morally inside yourself, building the capacity to understand one simple thing, which is the most complicated thing in the secret of the Rosicrucians. Exactly who were the people who were under the cross during the mystery of Golgotha? If you understand that, you understand all spiritual history and are given Rudolf Steiner's view of how karma works in an archetypal way and how reincarnation works in an archetypal way.
Yes. So, and then you can look at that and approach it from 4 fundamental vantage points. So you have your 4 gospels, and basically one way that you can look at it is that you have the Gospel of John, and John is that presence at the cross, right? So you have that, and looking into that deeper, you see that then there's the 3 other, what they refer to as the synoptic gospels. And it's interesting that they grouped them together because one gets the feeling that they didn't realize how interesting that is concerning certain things that they're not aware of. Because when you look at the manifestation of the synoptic gospels, giving a different vantage point on the biography of this great Maha Avatar, you could call him, the highest being that would ever enter directly into human existence in the whole evolution of the earth. So you could say, along with Rudolf Steiner, that therefore Christianity is not a religion, not merely a religion, because he's not just a teacher, that he is this great cosmic being that has this ever-present nature that you can align yourself with, and through that find your redemption. But then when you trace this back, There's this whole timeline that is given within spiritual science, leading all the way back into basically the Stone Age and before. And so you start to think, well, how is that possible that you can have these great beings that manage to keep their head above water, so to speak, that they maintain that path of initiation? They don't keep like crashing and burning like most of us do. Myself included, especially, because Steiner also gives examples of people that were great initiates in their previous incarnations, and then when they reincarnate, well, not so good, that they got stuff they got to clear up, So you shouldn't make this something that one would get proud about. You shouldn't be boastful about it. It's something it's in your secret heart. And here we are out in public, spreading the word. But people that aren't interested in this, well, they'll just change the channel. So that's okay. It kind of finds its own group.
When I get to it today, if we get to it today, I would like to read a passage from Steiner that says that it's okay, John. It's 100 years after he said these things. It's okay. We as aspiring Rosicrucians can now talk about the mysteries. And now I'm going back because of my obsession with plasma, and I'm reading these things going, holy cow. Steiner slapped me in the head over and over with about plasma. Hundreds of times, and I never noticed it. I don't know how that's possible. And so I went back and I'm reading these things going, oh Lord, he said that the etheric body of Christian Rosenkreutz, that ascension body that he gives, one of the few pictures that anybody talks about, the initiation of the Egyptians generally, I'm going to give general pictures here, 12 hierophants, 12 initiators around a person who is in a deep sleep, like a death sleep for 3 days. And they, during those 3 days, are led through the spiritual world. And when they come back, that becomes their inspiration for the rest of their life. Well, this happened to Christian Rosenkreutz. Now, John, you could clear this up for me, but Steiner says sometimes 13th century, sometimes 14th. He goes back and forth with these incarnations of Christian Rosenkreutz. So I'm not going to be too specific about that, but it's in the book, all the versions, and that's the reason I made sure to put all the versions so that you could see that it seems as if, as he says, this happened, this initiation of the wondrous child, where the child turns literally transparent. In other words, what all of us are going to turn into. And who is that? That's the being of Cain, who has been redeemed under the cross by being John the Beloved, who is not the other Johns, not John Zebedee and the others. No, this is Lazarus raised. So when we talk about great beings, we have to make utterly clear distinction between those who come down from the spiritual world, like John just mentioned, that Christ comes from the Holy Trinity. He's higher than the highest avatar. So John mentioned the Indian term Maha avatar, the highest of avatars, because he is a God who became human. Now, the bodhisattvas in general, because if you're a Buddhist and you study it like we do, then you know that there's many, many versions of all these things with Buddhism or anything from the East. Those bodhisattvas are usually humans who go through all the suffering through many incarnations to rise up and then be, out of their own human effort, they rise from a bodhisattva to a Buddha. Now, the term Buddha isn't just necessarily Eastern. Steiner said that the Gautama Buddha, after he ascended under the Bodhi tree, he was at Christ's birth, the humble birth that happened in the manger, that his Nirmanakaya, his spirit self, was there as the star. But then again, on the other hand, they were the three magi. I'm not going to go there yet, but you have two completely different stories, and this would drive people crazy. This is what have driven so many Christian organizations into separatists and people who say, no, it isn't that way. I'm reading directly from the Bible. It's literal. And then they fight over it and they create a new faction. And this is the history of modern Christianity. But as John said, Christ isn't a religion. Christ is a living being in the etheric realm who has perfected the physical, etheric, astral, ego bodies ahead of us, and the sentient soul, intellectual soul, spiritual soul, or consciousness soul. Christ has perfected these, and is drawing us up towards him. And so some people can access that. But it's not just true for Christ. Christ is the ultimate for the whole world and can appear to as many people as he wants, anywhere that he wants, anytime, in any way, because he completely is the Lord of this earth, the Lord of karma, and the Lord of reincarnation at this point, because he's the only God who ever became a human once. And as Steiner always says, and only once, or once and forever only. He goes to great extreme to make sure you understand that what the Theosophists think, that the Master Jesus is Jesus of Nazareth reincarnated. No, that is completely incorrect. And if you're a Christian cosmologist like myself, that's insulting. Christ was not a man. He was the perfected man. The original Adam body is still in heaven. But that Adam body, Adam Kadmon, the original Adam, came down to earth to help the descending being of Christ from the Holy Trinity, who was working from the mid-realm, the second rank of the spiritual hierarchies, all the way down into a physical body, carried with the help of this original Adam. And we've discussed this in previous talks, and it's in previous books that we've produced and are on Amazon. So as you look at this, you say, wait a second, this is getting just beyond cosmic. This is like hallucination type stuff. No, study it through to the end, and you will find that Steiner didn't just glue things together, because many of the things he says shocks you to your core. You will never recover. If you are a Christian, if you study like a philosopher, Christianity, and you hear Steiner's view of these things in the fifth gospel and in many of his interpretations of the four gospels, as John was going into, and in many, many other places, the number one thing Steiner probably addresses, in my estimation, Christ and the human being. How does this work out for the human being? Or Steiner always says, okay, so how's this working in my life? What does this mean? Who's going to care about this? And this is the issue. You are this. The being of Christian Rosenkreutz shows you how you go from being the prodigal son back to receiving your inheritance, and even shows you the development of the physical body through that, shows you the work of the masters and the bodhisattvas and Christ, and how you as a person can actually tap into these different levels that are still there present as basically a resonant memory, that once you tune to that resonance, you can then experience what that being went through. But that being has gone on, as John just pointed out. So when you hear some of these reincarnations of Rudolf Steiner in his series called The Karmic Relationships, it's a whole set of books, it will shock you. You'll say, that can't be true. And then you meditate on it for about 20 years, and you'll go, I get it. That's my biography he's talking about. That's me, just as John just pointed out. We all go through a roller coaster ride in our incarnations. And so someone who's a master, who's a human rising up to be a bodhisattva, and this is the vow of the bodhicitta, it's the vow of Kuan Yin. Once you see the gates of heaven, the first thing you should think about, as Parsifal eventually thought about, was his brother, bringing his brother to the gates of heaven. So the first thing Kuan Yin did when she got to heaven, because she went to heaven, she ascended just like Mary, Sophia, Eve, Mary, according to Steiner. When you're at the gates of heaven, you only have one thought: turning around and helping the other people come up to join you and getting them through the gates before you go in. Because you can go in, but that's not your concern anymore. You're not about your personal self-development. So a human has to be initiated by either beings in the spiritual world or these great master beings who are bodhisattvas, developing towards what Steiner even calls the Manu stage. So our next two books down the line, Scythianus, or the Manu, the father of culture, and Scythianus, the hidden master. So once you know that Manu, Scythianus, and Zarathustra, who we're going to talk about here, called the Master Jesus. So let's just get that. We'll talk about that in the second talk, I believe, when we go really deep into this, because that's the deepest secret there is in all of human evolution, period. That's why they call it the mystery of Golgotha. It's a mystery. It's a living mystery that's still unfolding. So it's not some historical lineage thing. It's reality. So when we go into that, we'll get into the fact that on Atlantis, Manu was the head of the Sun Mystery Initiation Temple. Well, Christ worked through the sun, so Manu was directly in contact. His students were Scythionis, who we're not going to talk about today because I'll go crazy on that one, because nobody knows about Scythionis, and yet he's one of the deepest masters that there ever were. John knows about him, but literally few anthroposophists, if you said Scythionis, yeah, Steiner talks about him all the time, so what? What's that do for me? We're going to go into that later. But Manu, that was a stage where there is, and this is debatable. You can debate me on this if you want, John, but the holy rishis on Atlantis were connected to the 7 planets because they were overlighted, or in some way, an angel being from that planet worked through them. But because Manu was the leader of the holy rishis, he was the sun oracle who pulled all those planets together and basically became the model of what we should be in the future. So Manu, in the far future, there's another master I won't talk about today who has already been declared to be the Manu of the future. And so it's hard to debate. I mean, it's easy to debate and hard to understand whether Scythionis and Zoroaster, really what their level is, but he sometimes groups them in the 12 bodhisattvas around Christ. Now, if you're a highly developed person, being, and you don't see Christ, then you're not a highly developed being, because Christ is active now. This is not some, Vishvakarman. This is not Vishnu. This is not Ahura Mazdeo. This is not all these beings, the Helios or Apollo or all these beings of the sun. No, the sun has come to the earth, and we are now becoming a sun. That's Christ in our heart. So as we're looking at this, you're looking at the deepest stream. And all I can say is, when you look at this stream, you have to do it with the greatest reverence you can possibly have in your capacity to understand things that are beyond the physical world. You have to see what the Rosicrucians were seeking, what is behind the physical world, or what they call Maya, or illusion. Many take that to be that they throw out the physical world. That's not what we're supposed to do, but the physical world will overwhelm you if you don't know what it is. But if you know what it is, you can turn nature into art. But man-made stuff, that's not nature and that's not art. So you have to distinguish this, and that all comes from development of initiation. So once you're initiated and you have 12 hierophants around you, you have the 12 perspectives, you can see into space and you understand that your astral body is even beyond the stars. It's in a realm that reaches beyond the stars, has nothing to do with space and time, is invisible, and yet is the motive force that affects your etheric body, that which creates this physical body we have only down here on earth. And then once you get into your ego, that's Christ. That is a gift created in this template on the Mother Lodge of the Sun, where all of our original beings await us to replicate the gifts that look like they're coming from the future, but they're not. They're actually were created in the past, but the past was such a beautiful archetype that it draws us. It's like the seed of a plant. How does the seed of the plant know about the roots, the stem, the cotyledon, the leaves, the blossom, the seed? How does it know that? How can you look at a seed and explain it to me, please? You can't. Well, that's what the human being is. We're a seed. We are a god in the becoming, a goddess in the becoming. But we have to realize down here on earth, there's a polarity going on. And so we get the 2 Johns of Jerusalem. In Masonry, that's the secret teaching. Go to any Mason, I dare you, and say, who are the 2 Johns of Jerusalem? They don't know. And they sure don't know what Steiner explains, which is so self-evident that when you first read him or you hear it said, you go, oh, of course. It's the only explanation. So Steiner was simply a clairvoyant who, when he trained his mind and his heart and his will, and as he says, the Rosicrucians bring the willpower up into thinking. And when they do, they create the ability to see through Maya, see what's on the other side of matter. And he literally says, and yesterday I'm reading it going, oh, I can't wait to tell John. Well, I didn't call you to tell you that I was going to say this today, but this passage clearly says the ultimate secret of the Rosicrucians, which Steiner can't give out, has to wait 100 years, is to be able to see behind matter, to know that matter is not real and that substance, the spirit is not matter. Well, that's really the secret of plasma, isn't it? And that's the reason we've just done 3 books on plasma. It's the Pentecostal flame above the head. What is that flame? What's the flame in the heart that the ancient Indians talk about? What's the flame in your willpower? Where does your heat come from? Where does your energy come from to build things that humans have built that are unimaginable? Where does that come from? That's your willpower. What is that? Well, that is the secret of the Rosicrucians, and that's what we're trying to share with you today, that I would like for you to get into studying this so that it becomes the archetype upon which you can now develop your own spiritual evolution.
Yes, and in looking into the path that's laid out by Christian Rosenkreutz and the Comte de Saint Germain and the Master Jesus, the Master Zarathustra, and the other attendant great beings, is that you have your own path. You don't have to pursue someone else's path. You have your own path. And therefore, in a sense, the path comes to you, because when you go to it, it comes to you. And so if you're not getting there, that's because you're not going there. There's a certain amount of intention involved in a willingness to participate in this great symphony of being. And so, like Christ says, he says, if you're embarrassed of me, then I'm embarrassed of you. So it's really kind of funny, because it's like, why didn't anybody tell me this? Well, you never asked, you know. So when you get into trying to unlock the secrets in the Gospels, you have to respect the reality that out of the 6,586, I believe, at this point, lectures of Rudolf Steiner and 50 published articles and books and all of that, that there's an internal consistency, that you could take things from not quite the very beginning, because there is a developmental cycle that you'll find in Rudolf Steiner's work, where there's a clarification of terminology, really is what it is. It wasn't that he wasn't having the perception, it was that he hadn't formalized the manner in which he was going to speak about it. So you might bump your head on a few things in the early lecture cycles. They go, well, wait a minute, that's not what he said in 1909 or whatever. And that's okay, because it's good that you run into that, because then you go, well, why is that? Why is he saying it this way now and he says it this other way at a later period? So I don't want you to get lost in the weeds on this, because it's something that you can live with and it will unfold as time goes by. But in first looking at some of this, you see that before Rudolf Steiner built the Goetheanum, the fully wooden one that was made out of carved wood and stained glass with no nails or screws or anything metal like that in the construction, that there was a previous building that was to be built, and it was called the Johannesbau. And it was meant to be the place of the 2 Johns. So again, we go back to this question that Douglas was asking about the Freemasons and their question in regards to the 2 Johns. What are the 2 Johns? And so you have John the Baptist, and you have St. John the Divine, and you have the mystery of their central role in participating within the deeper levels of the mystery of Golgotha, and that you have three other facets of that manifested biography. So you have in the Gospel of Luke, you have that story told of the shepherds in the field and the angels singing hallelujah with the again the Nirmanakaya of Buddha up there as the orchestra leader, which is a bit of a stretch for most people, admittedly. But when you look at that and you see that that's the Nathan Jesus, that's the Jesus that is pristine, that has never fully incarnated into a human being. And this child develops, and it's quite a simple soul, but with the biggest heart you could possibly imagine, that was taking interest in people, but not in history or book, knowledge of that nature, that he was that simple, pure soul. And then around age 12, that the other Jesus that Rudolf Steiner talks about has to do with the Gospel of Matthew, and that's the incarnation of the Master, what we call the Master Jesus, the Master Zarathustra. And this child, around age 12, passes away. And so this being, this great master being, then travels over and incarnates into the Nathan Jesus, so that you have this kind of dual natured being. And that's encountered in the Gospels, where he goes to the temple when they're in Jerusalem. He gets lost, or they can't find him, and they find him in the temple confounding the elders, that all of a sudden he's this great being who has all of this knowledge pertaining to Scripture that amazed everybody, and they spoke of him as if it was a power speaking. And when they say something to that effect, that's pretty profound, because what that is referring to in the word that they use is referring to great cosmic beings, and having them work through you, that you're not just like a scribe coming off of a piece of paper, but that you are speaking out of the subject rather than at the subject. And so he developed in that capacity throughout his life, and eventually got to a point to where he sacrificed these vehicles that he'd helped further develop, and he exited so that the incarnation of Christ could take place in the baptism and culminate in the mystery of Golgotha.
Yes, I'm so glad you went there, because I didn't know if I could. Yeah, and so let's talk about the Master Zoroaster. He was a student of Manu on Atlantis and after Atlantis, and then 10 incarnations in Persia, what we call the Aryans, after Manu helped inculcate what they call the Aryan incursion into northern India, the Harappan culture, highly developed culture, because Manu had, with the holy rishis, traveled to Central Europe and there settled and created a city called the city of Manu. And out of that, for many thousands of years later, through the lineage of Manu's probably incarnated there many times, just as later in the area of Persia, Zoroaster was incarnated 10 times, Rudolf Steiner says. Well, that's extraordinary. If you could remember everything you learned in a previous incarnation in your next. But let's say, well, that's completely absurd. No, study it. What you'll find is this being of Zoroaster was accredited with writing the Zendavesta and the Gathas, which are basically equivalent to Manu's laws and later the Upanishads. And to me, my favorite book, the Chaldean Oracles, which I just went back to last night because it's in this book. We put in quotes here of Zoroaster. Now, John can give you the full historical lowdown on the Chaldean Oracles, but essentially it's the teachings of Zoroaster. But the point is that he wrote these sacred texts. He also helped bring in what we call playing cards the tarot, chess, checkers, all these games, they were games. These are divination tools. And so I still use it. John taught me this system that is the most accurate system I've ever used, and it's actually accredited to the ancient Zoroaster. And it was used as their caste system. So when you were born, you could look up your birth date and say, oh, you really want to be a teacher when you grow up. So we're going to put you in that line to learn that, and it's like, oh, how do you know that from the moment I'm born? But guys, the angle of the sun spoke to him through the being Ahura Mazdeo, the being of light. And Ahriman stood in between, and Zoroaster means the golden plow. Now, it's oftentimes miscalculated or mistranslated, but it's basically, Rudolf Steiner said, it's like a dagger plow that he used when he did hybrids and created hybrids. So when you trace this back, and I did at one point, and I was going to go to the exact spot where I say the Garden of Eden was, and then Halliburton put it underwater, which they also did with the city of Manu, by the way, just as an aside, so that it could not be proven. But basically, Zoroaster created what we use as our vegetables and our grains, most of them in the West particularly, and our domesticated animals. We have to thank him for our food. That's an astounding proof that whoever this was, culture, human being, priest king, Steiner says he was a priest king, and that he got this from the initiation wisdom from Manu, from Atlantis, and later when they traveled across Europe.
And you can't forget the fruit trees.
All the fruit trees were crossed with the roses. All the grains were crossed with the lily. So when you go, oh, what did you just say? Well, that's the whole secret of Fleur and Blankenfleur and the Rosicrucians, and your brain explodes. So then I started looking this up, because I was teaching third grade, which was the Hebrews, and I took it literally. If you take it literally, you can find the Garden of Eden in like 10 minutes. It's in Anatolia, because the 4 rivers are described in great detail that come out of the garden. The description of the garden is right there, and then they put it underwater. So I was literally going to take a trip there and gather up the oldest lilies and roses from there and show that all lilies and roses come from Anatolia. And by the way, if you know Anatolia, it's the Garden of Paradise. They can grow anything there. It's so beautiful. And the other attempts at finding the Garden of Eden put it near the Persian Gulf and so on and so forth. But it's obvious what it is, because we don't take it literally. If you take some of these things literally, the ancients had a better view of it. As a matter of fact, I was reading to Tyler last night a paragraph from the Chaldean oracles from Master Zarathustra, and it described plasma in the clearest way that I've ever seen described. I mean, when you finish this paragraph, you go, wait a second. How come the current scientism doesn't understand this? All they'd have to do is read this paragraph, and they would understand where the tree of life is. The whole thing, it's all described there. So the ancients could experience it through natural clairvoyance, but Zoroaster it's hard to say whether he was started off as a human on Atlantis or a bodhisattva, or he was always destined to be a Manu. I don't know. Same thing with Scythianus, and same thing with Manu. Where is Manu now? And then the future Manu, I'll tell you, because you're probably going to ask me in the questions, who's that one you said? That Mani, M-A-N-I, he's a historical being. When you put all these in perspective with Rudolf Steiner, you have the most complete explanation of comparative religions that I personally have been searching for since I could open an encyclopedia and start reading about them. And when I was in the Catholic Church, that was what I did. And these are the answers. Now, the problem is these answers were derived through clairvoyance, through Steiner being able to read the Akashic records. And he could ask any question and go get the answer, but it might take a long time. He might take extraordinary patience. He might have to meet a being who then directs him in the answer to that question. And sometimes the answers he couldn't give out. And that's what I believe we are now, 100 years later, when his name is being defiled in his Waldorf schools and his Christian community and Anthroposophical Society, which he said would happen. We are opening up the secrets of Christian Rosenkreutz's tomb. And if you're a Rosicrucian, you know what that means. It's all the wisdom in the world put in one place. It's like what Amos Comenius and the Unity Brethren, and his whole life, Amos Comenius wanted to put the whole universe into an encyclopedia, both of the vernacular and of the Latin, with pictures and explanations. In other words, modern education. And that would lead us into materialism, which we needed to be led into, because personally, I don't like materialism. And it's one of my biggest faults. I couldn't get my computer to work today. I don't care. I don't care about the computer because I was so involved in it before. I've gone the opposite direction. So you see, Christian Rosenkreutz and John the Baptist have gone through the most incarnations, except for Eve and Abel, of any human being. So if we look at their incarnations according to true spiritual wisdom directly from the Akashic record, and here's how you know it's true, because it sounds true, it can be applied and demonstrated to be true. And that's what's the beauty of Steiner. He said, I don't know, hundreds of predictions 100 years ago that have all come true. So you start to say, well, you know, the guy has a little bit on his side. You have to say he's scored a few points with his accuracy. And remember, in the old days, if you were a prophet and you said one thing wrong, they chopped off your head.
Maybe he's on to something.
Maybe he's onto something. So I've been trying to see if he made mistakes in his, as John just pointed out, all those books. I think it's 384 books and many articles and lectures. Think of it, 384 books that had to hold his lectures. And each of these lectures, one lecture, could blow your mind permanently and give you the answer you've been looking for all your life. And I'm not exaggerating, because when I read The Pre-Earthly Deeds of Christ, that was it. It was like, oh no, it took me probably 50 years to fully cognize it, or not even partially cognize it. But this is what we're dealing with here. So we cannot trivialize these incarnations, because so many pseudo clairvoyants out of the direct occult school of Ahriman, which Rudolf Steiner predicted, which would be centered in America, and look at all the people in America who said they channeled or were Saint Germain. I can't name them all, and I won't, but I named a lot of them in the book. So what we're saying is, you can turn to yourself. These are your biographies, and they're imprinted as archetypes in the etheric of the earth, which is imprinted in your etheric body. So you don't have to go out to some etheric realm. You go in, and when you do, all these archetypes are there. So it would literally be true for a clairvoyant, a good clairvoyant, to say, I can channel anybody. Before, but after they died, they turned into different people. But I can channel their etheric body, which is it's preserved because it was so perfected. So when you think about Saint Francis, on some parts you could call him all kinds of derogatory names, and on other parts you could say he was one of the most holy saints the Catholic Church ever saw. Okay, and he actually imbibed, and we're starting to call it. It's like taking, those seals they used to use on wax when they would close a letter. He says it's like Christ in the etheric is the seal, and you are the wax, and the imprint is going on you, and it's being imprinted on you. But it also seals you. It's like the seals that are unsealed in the apocalypse. And remember, John the Beloved was Lazarus. Afterwards, he took care of Mary for 11 years. And then he traveled all over, and he ended up on Patmos. He got condemned to Patmos. And he wrote the letters of John, some of the most spiritual things in the gospel, in the whole Bible, New Testament, Old Testament. He wrote the Gospel of John, which by far, to me, is the most inspiring. Just the first sentences of it are the most inspiring thing in the Bible. And then he wrote the Apocalypse, which is proof that he was initiated. He was taken into the upper heavens. He was taught by the flames and the elders. He saw the thunder and lightning of the throne, understood it, came back and taught it to us. And so when you read Apocalypse, it is not locked in time. It's locked in you. Each of us goes through an apocalypse. Each of us goes through being Cain and Abel. Each of us goes through being Adam and Eve. Each of us, we should be trying to reach our original template. And the original template, the example, is Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, who had also Zarathustra from age 12 to 30, providing his ego which was the greatest wisdom any human, probably besides Manu and Scythianus, had ever embodied. So he had access to all the history of all the development of humanity spiritually and physically. And then that left him right before he went into be baptized in the Jordan. But before that, he spoke to the person that wasn't really his mother, but she was called the Mother, who was really one of these ancient beings reincarnated. It took that to be the person who could basically help Christ through his ministry and then help him through these transitions at age 12, at age 30, and then at age 33. It took one of the greatest beings there was. And so literally under the cross, I'll just say this, Adam Kadmon, the original Adam, the original Eve Kadmon, the original Adam and Eve physically, as well as Christian Rosenkreutz, and others were under the cross because it was, and Cain and Abel, it was the resolution of all of spiritual history. And that's why Steiner said it was the turning point of time. When those who committed even fratricide in the past and killed their own brother could be forgiven and become the new initiate of our time that shows us that we can be forgiven of all of our sins. And still, once we have the 12 perspectives of the 12 great religions or great teachings and ourselves, we become this new Christian Rosenkreutz, this wondrous child who has a transparent body and who has a synthesis of all of the great teachings all the way back to Atlantis. And remember, on Atlantis, they had the Tao. And that's exactly what one of these beings had in an incarnation, was the Tao hammer. And the Tao hammer is the magic language. And if you have the magic language, you can build buildings without touching the stone. You can do anything. The world is all subject to your command, and you speak, as John said, with authorities or with dominion. So powers, mights, and dominion. That's what was the second rank of the hierarchy, was speaking through that 12-year-old child, who was John so beautifully characterized, was almost seen as challenged. And then all of a sudden, he becomes even more brilliant than the 12-year-old child who was probably hanging out anyway. He was probably born, So oftentimes I attribute it to Mary of Jerusalem, Mary of the Essenes, Jesus of Jerusalem, and Jesus of the Essenes. So if Jesus of Jerusalem was hanging out because his cousin was, the high priest, of course he was probably pretty smart. But when that intelligence of Master Jesus went into the Nathan child, the pure original Adam, who had done some deeds to help all of humanity even before that, that became a synthesis of all wisdom. And then it was handed over to Eve. Oops, I said who she was. Sorry. Handed over to the mother, handed over to the being who'd come through many incarnations, the only being who could hold that wisdom also. And she held the wisdom. And after Christ died, who did they listen to? Her and Mary Magdalene. Why? Because if you knew who she was in the previous incarnation, it would make all the good sense to you. But she was wise. She had to hold that for the entire ministry of Christ. And then afterwards, St. John the Beloved took care of her, because she wasn't just the mother anymore. She wasn't Mary of Jerusalem anymore. She had not only the original Mary overlighting her, but she also had the beings of wisdom, Sophia they're called, overlighting her. So she became one of the greatest human beings there ever was. And so once you know these stories, and that story is told in the Gospel of Sophia, as far as I know, the only complete, clear, comprehensive, and the moral training that goes with it to understand it that I know of anywhere. What we're telling you is because we're assuming that some of you study Steiner and you're going, what does this mean? What's he talking about? As I just told you, I am now realizing he put secrets in all of his teachings until 100 years later. Some people may wake up and read it and go, oh, we've now discovered that in science. So he was 100 years ahead in many, many, many predictions. And with this, he's about 36,000 years ahead. because it tells who you're going to become in the future and who you were in the past and the models that you can follow. And you can actually pull these models into you at moments, maybe only for a short while. For instance, Christian Rosenkreutz's mythology was created by 3 stories written by Johann Valentin Andreas. And that then basically is, we don't know a lot about that being. And so the rest of it had to come from the Akashic records. But why? Because it's permanently written there, and Steiner could tap into it through his spiritual bodies and bring this wisdom to us because it was the time for it to come. So the old religions, the old lineages, Buddha, all of the Zoroastrianism, every religion you can imagine is all rolled up in Christian Rosenkreutz, literally his body and his teachings. So you could ultimately say Rudolf Steiner's spiritual science is Rosicrucianism, which he says many times, but it's a Rosicrucianism that has a Christian cosmology that if you don't understand it, you don't get the point. But if you do understand it, like for me, it was the culmination of all of my studies for my whole life, and it still is. And I keep reading more, and I go, John said, "Oh no, you got to read the excursus on the Gospel of Saint Mark, where and I go and I read that lecture again. I go, I've read this 3 times. I never understood that. And when you understand it, it still is as true. It's got that internal coherence that John talked about. Now, how can anybody do that? Give 6,000 lectures and make them coherent? I can't give 2 lectures and make it coherent.
I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday. So it's like, and I'm supposed to be able to be cogent and consistent, and that's the internal consistency in Rudolf Steiner's work that anybody who seriously studies it has to confront, because there have been people that have spent many years trying to find inconsistencies, and the only thing inconsistent, almost in all cases, is they're thinking about what they're studying, because it's not the fault of the material so much as it is the skill of the person who's attempting to mine the treasures that are hidden away so discreetly as an open secret that Rudolf Steiner talks about, this open secret, that it's there for all to see, but only when you're prepared to see it. And so it's like this preparing for a guest. And so Rudolf Steiner makes mention on occasion of that people would, in the past, they'd receive a letter from Christian Rosenkreutz or the Comte de Saint-Germain, and that locked, kind of encoded within in the letter, were certain words that would give that individual an inspiration that would find manifestation in their life as it rolled out, and they didn't even know it was there. And the chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz, of course, is the penultimate example, because you have a 16, 17-year-old boy with aspirations towards religious subjects who starts writing this little short story, so to speak, of the story of Christian Rosenkreutz, who comes from a family in Europe and travels to parts in the East, in the Holy Land and thereabouts, and finds the various wisdom streams in that area, and spends time there learning these things, and then comes back to Europe very much inspired. And when he gets there, he realizes that he can only find the merest handful of people that were the least bit interested in what he had found. And so that became the basis of the Rosicrucian school. And it's quite interesting in that when you get to where you're trying to unlock its secrets, you'll find that much of it is said in a picture language. And so therefore, if you don't get the picture, then you don't follow the story. And so consequently, you have like Johann Valentin Andreas, the author of The Chemical Wedding, saying he refers to it as a ludubrium, as kind of a joke, so to speak. He refers to it later in life, so that he was writing things that he didn't understand. It's just like when you listen to like a song that you know very well, and it makes you think of certain things. But that doesn't mean that the person who wrote the song, that that's what they were thinking about. It's kind of encoded within the song, within the words of the song, within the melody of the song, within the harmony of the song. That life is encoded. And that's where the whole idea of the key of Asha, or the chessboard, comes from, or all these various tools of divination, is that they are presenting you with the quality of a particular moment in time, and that can be interpreted. And that's a very, very ancient tradition. In Constantinople, they used to do bibliomancy. They would have a Bible up on like an altar or a lectern, and they would just open it randomly and then point on the page, and it would give them guidance as to what they might do in their current situation. And so, well, what is that? Is that the quality of time expressing itself?
It's certainly beings working through art and imageries, and I'm so glad you mentioned that. In our next talk, which will be the deeper secrets of Saint Germain and Master Jesus, we're going to talk about Anna May Richter's triptych painting that was supposed to be in the first St. John's building, the Johannesbau in Munich, that Steiner was planning, and then he had to close those plans down, and he moved it to the first Goetheanum, the building John described earlier. Well, at the back of the Johannesbau was supposed to be this giant picture, a triptych of 3. And when you stood before it, it was supposed to give you what you needed for your spiritual evolution. And one frame is the temple, that basically the people involved in the temple building of Solomon. The second is who's under the cross. The third is the initiation of Christian Rosenkreutz. And so it is a symbol, it's an art that is impressing in you these archetypes. And this is what so many of these mysteries were about, is explaining what these things were. Now in the Bible, Steiner said, I give to my apostles. He says, I give you the mysteries, but I give to the public parables. And for instance, he said at one point, I cursed this fig tree. Well, that was the Bodhi tree. So he was cursing the condemnation of Maya and hoping for the redemption of the physical world. So Steiner points out that Christ was saying, there are no more ancient mystery initiations. They come from yourself. And that's why he cursed the fig tree. If you don't know that, you'll spend your whole life, like I did, wondering, what the heck does that mean? Why would he curse a tree? But if you understand the mysteries, then you understand many of these things. And that's what we're trying to present to you with this. And really, at the core of it is just one mystery, and that's the mystery of Christ, which is at the core of Steiner's Christian cosmology.
Excellent. And so in combination here, we're going to be leading into the Grail triptych that was put together by Anna May van Richter. And fortunately, we can avail ourselves of Margarita's Hauschka's translation that was translated by a very dear friend of ours, Sonja von Humrick. And so we were able to take that and craft it a little bit more and add it together with the researches that we've done over the last 50 years or so, and hope that we have created for you a very, very useful tool for your personal attainment through helping others.
Through science fell in wisdom's